All right.
Bye.
All right.
That's right.
Everyone listening, I'd like to announce my wife left me because of my podcasting.
My wife left me for my I left my wife for my podcast.
I made the choice. I have left the podcast over wife.
Podcaster's life. All right. We only lost a minute, Matt. It's fine.
You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you need the wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know.
When looking at all the Pathfinder classes, I just realized like how easy or how much easier it is to make a Pathfinder class in that you can always add, you get plus your class level to 3 skills and that's an ability. And it's like in 5th edition, every class has to come up with like a unique thing that only they can do. Like, only paladins can smite evil, only rogues can use cunning action. Like, you've got to come up with a new rules thing for the class to do. You can't just give them bonuses.
Yeah, which is both good and bad. It's one of the good things about 5th edition, and I guess it sort of represents sort of the different design philosophies of Pathfinder and 5th edition, which when we get to talking about Dungeons and Data, we can, I think, is one of the reasons why Pathfinder remains strong even with all of 5th edition's growth, because I do think there's still an appetite for that type of game.
What I imagine happening, and if I had to guess what's going to happen in the future, is I'm guessing with all these older editions, but especially Pathfinder because there's ongoing support, they're not going to see continual growth. But there is, what's the math term, an asymptote, a number that the curve of players will approach but not fall below, right? I think we see it even with like 3.5. Like on Roll20, there's still, 8,000 games of 3.5. And I don't think even in, 5 years we'll see that number go below 7,000, right? Because people are going to keep playing that. And more power to him.
Yeah. Actually, I did want to talk about Matt Colville's Kickstarter more, though. How do we get off on this tangent? Oh, we were talking about Pathfinder leadership rules. I have not had a chance to actually look at the Kickstarter very much. Does he give like a preview of what's being offered in the book? I know a big part of the Kickstarter is for him to stream his own game, which I support. But I'm curious about the contents of the Stronghold book.
So as of this recording, he's up to $750,000, which is like, holy shit.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. It's a book of 125 pages plus support for streaming. Plus, I'm sure there's a ton of stretch goals that will make that bigger. The actual things that are in the product are keeps, towers, temples, establishments. Strongholds enhance your class abilities. Followers, units, I'm guessing for like armies. Low-level heroes who can pledge their service. Artisans, ambassadors, and some special rules. It's very much like stuff that I think was in very early editions of the rulebook about Strongholds and Followers, but
it seems very second edition. Well, we should probably back this so that we can figure out what the deal is when it comes out. What's the backer level?
I think you can, and I think this is a pretty well designed Kickstarter in that you can pay $20 for a PDF of the book.
Oh, right. I actually did look. $20 for a PDF, $30 for a hardcover. That's reasonable.
Right, which is like, and this is a good Kickstarter strategy. Like, I mean, the PDF should cost about $20. So kickstarting it is like, oh yeah, you should get your money's worth.
I have poo-pooed it a little bit, but I know for sure that my Eberron players would love if I could like provide them with some rules for this is how much you need to spend to have a mansion in the city or whatever, and then they could, work towards that. I think they would like that a lot, actually. So,
meanwhile, at stately Wayne Manor,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's 5th edition players need stuff to spin some fucking gold on. So.
That's true.
got to talk about some world
Let's
building?
talk about some world building. I have a lot of things that I want to say about this, but I imagine that you have some sort of outline or possibly even a primer.
So world building, you want to make your own adventure, and you also want to have it set in a world of your own creation. World building is like one of the most fun things you can do as a DM, right? It's just pleasurable in and of itself.
Right. It is a lot of fun to world build, and this is both one of its benefits and one of its potential downfalls. You want to be careful when world building that you don't let the world building overtake the actual play of the game. And this is a real common rookie DM mistake. They will put a lot of effort into their homebrew setting and then sort of railroad their players into participating in it in the way that they see is the way that they want it to go down. And that's not the purpose of world building, and it shouldn't be the purpose of your homebrew.
Making your own world is not writing a huge story that's already written, and it's also not just world building for the sake of world building. Everything you should do should ultimately tie into whatever campaign you're going to run.
One of the benefits of world building to deal with unexpected turns, and this is one of the things I wanted to say early on, was that it's useful even if you're running an established campaign or an established module to have a little bit of experience with world building. And you'll notice that even official and experienced DMs will have some homebrew elements and some world building elements. Even sometimes if they have written the official module themselves. I think I'm going to get this example wrong, but I think Chris Perkins does this with he ran a campaign with a module that he actually wrote himself and continued to make changes as he was running it. So even if you're running Storm King's Thunder or Curse of Strahd, it's great to have a little bit of experience homebrewing or world building on your own so that you can adapt to what your players are doing.
Rob, question. Ryan Reynolds GIF pulling down Doctor's mask, but why? But why world build?
But why indeed? Well, as we talked about already, it's fun. It is one of the best ways to engage with your world. If you're dungeon mastering and you want to avoid burnout, which is a real serious problem, maybe, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe the number one problem after scheduling a bunch of adults to get together.
The
and play.
American Association of Dungeon Masters attributes the leading cause of campaign death to DM burnout. It's very serious.
So a great way to combat that is to do a little bit of world building or do a little bit of homebrewing to get your creative muscles working. Though a great way to get burned out is to world build too much. So make sure that you're not overworking yourself, but it's a great way to practice your own creativity and to get yourself involved in the play of the game.
It's also really special, right? You can say to your players, like, this is a world that, maybe draws inspiration from some things, but none of you know anything about. You can't read about it in a book, can't play it in a video game, you can't go buy a R.A. Salvatore novel and know everything there is to know about this world because it's mine, and now it's going to be ours.
Exactly. And one of the things, this is a topic for a broader episode maybe, but I think that as the demographics of Dungeons and Dragons has changed and science fiction and fantasy has gone more mainstream, that the traditional settings offered to you, well, specifically Forgotten Realms, but really all of them, are increasingly inadequate for the breadth and depth of cultural and social and narrative phenomena that we are exposed to. And so world building, I think, is becoming increasingly necessary to explore the themes and ideas and tropes that players are going to be familiar with.
If you don't homebrew, you have to use someone else's campaign setting or just kind of ignore that there's no outside world outside of the dungeon or the village your players are in, which is not a great option. So you use one of the established campaign settings, assuming you're playing 5th edition. What's available to you? What do you have? And we want to talk about these different options.
Right. So as of right now, the only officially supported campaign setting is Forgotten Realms. And there's good things and there's bad things about Forgotten Realms. One of the good things about it is familiarity. almost all of your players, if they've read any fantasy at all or played any video games or done any sort of tabletop role-playing before, are going to recognize the Forgotten Realms, even if they don't know all the details.
It's got all the things, ancient empires that have been destroyed that had better magic than today, elves of many flavors.
A dark elf who wields 2 scimitars and is chaotic good, where all of his brethren are evil of some sort.
Forgotten Realms, though, is basically your typical high fantasy. It's got all the things. It's got high magic. It's got a million different races, a million different flavors of humans. Isn't very exciting. And one of the things that if anyone from Wizards of the Coast is listening, we would like to say is get beyond the Forgotten Realms. Stop publishing all your things set in this campaign. I think I understand why they're sticking with it. Is they've got crossover potential.
It's got crossover potential.
There's the Neverwinter games.
Right.
There's
and it's
Lords of Waterdeep.
Yeah, and it's
They're just trying to sell some board games.
It's familiar, and it works well with, you don't have to like do anything complicated with your dwarf or your elf or your half orc or whoever. You can make a dwarf and they've got a Scottish accent and they're from the mountains and they like to do stonework and fight with axes. Or you've got an elf and they're from the woods. They fire a bow. It's very easy for players to graft their expectations onto.
We'll do a whole episode on the Forgotten Realms in the future, but if you want to stick to the official Dungeons & Dragons publications from the current edition, that's your only options. Now, if you want to go back to later editions, there are many other campaign settings.
Right, and I wanted to talk about why those exist and what's good about those and what you can draw from them. They don't have stats. They don't have the numbers that you're going to need to make those transitions if you're trying to use a race or a class that's not in 5th edition. But it's got all of the fluff. So if you want to set your campaign in Ravenloft, in Dark Sun, in Eberron, in Spelljammer, you can do that. You're going to have to do a little bit of extra work to work out some of the numbers. I had these problems when I was setting up my Eberron game. I run an Eberron game. I had to do a lot of conversions myself. 5th edition, by the way, I want to say is possibly the easiest edition yet to do conversions for. Everything is much more streamlined, and it doesn't take a whole lot of work to bring things up to speed. So one of the things, in addition to crunchy bits, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, the reasons why I think campaign settings like Dark Sun, Eberron, Spelljammer exist is to explore ideas of theme. Theme, right. And we've talked about theme before and how it's important and how it helps bind the game together. But so, for example, Eberron is a little steampunk, it's a little noir, it's a little pulp. Spelljammer is very much Age of Sail, high adventure on the seas, except the seas are space.
A little bit of Star Trek in there.
A little Star Trek, that's right. Dark Sun is a grim, shitty future, Barsoom, Dune type of setting where,
the world is dying.
World in decay.
And you can't save it.
What can I say?
And you can't save it.
Oh yeah, that's right. You can't save it. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's yeah.
You can only survive.
It allows you to build like a different feel for the campaign, and this is, I think, the really juicy bit of world building is exploring different themes rather than, oh, my world has this is a burn on Pat Rothfuss and Brandon Sanderson, but oh, my world has a very scientific magic system, blah 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 blah. No, that's not, I think, the most interesting thing about world building. I think it's exploring different themes.
And so you can port over these old campaign settings very easily and buy a lot of the PDFs of them on the Wizards of the Coast website, which is super great, right? And as Robert said, conversions to 5th edition are really easy, but using or stealing from one of these campaign settings is still not making one of your own. There are other options beyond Wizards of the Coast. There are many different third-party publishers who have made campaign settings inspired or very compatible with 5th edition with their own sets of things. There's one for playing in Tolkien's Middle-earth. There's other sorts of regular fantasy things. There are a lot of post-apocalyptic ones. There are even more steampunk campaign settings. Even Matt Mercer has published his own campaign setting.
Speak about destruction. Speak about destruction. Speak about destruction. This is a world destruction. Your life ain't nothing. The human race is becoming a disgrace. Countries are fighting.
Yeah, so you can get a third-party campaign settings, and these are places great for inspiration. But we'll definitely do more episodes devoted to these third-party campaign settings. But now that we've surveyed the options, if you're deciding, and you know what's out there, if you're still deciding to create your own homebrew campaign setting, I think now's the time where we ask ourselves, now that we've asked ourselves why, now we ask ourselves where. Where do we start?
Matt and I are obviously proponents of this. We have both homebrewed more than one setting each and done plenty of conversions. It is fun. It is engaging. It, I think, makes you a better DM. As we talked about before, it helps prevent burnout. If you're engaging with your own setting and your players are enjoying it, it's a lot more rewarding than continuing to run a pre-made module. In my opinion, though I do like pre-made modules for a break from world building. But do be warned going into this that it is a lot of work. It can be unrewarding at times. There are a lot of fiddly bits that you don't think of that you're going to have to work on. There's a lot of stuff that you're going to think is important that your players are not going to care about. And there are pitfalls and roadblocks that you're going to want to be aware of. So we highly recommend that you do some world building if it's of all interest to you, but be warned that it can end up taking over your life. It can end up being a lot of work for nothing, and it can take away from the purpose of the game, which is to have fun and build a shared narrative with your friends, if you're not careful.
And then I would say, after all of those warnings, where do you start?
Right.
There's no correct answer to this. The correct answer for me is always inspiration, right? Is it someone, because I'm never going to write America's next best-selling fiction series. Maybe Rob will, but I know that's not my forte. But I get really inspired by watching fiction or reading other campaign settings. I'm like, I love this aspect. I don't like this part. I love this theme. I want to take that. So for me, listing out the things that inspire you for my campaign setting is where I start.
That's right. What I take a similar approach that Matt does. I think about things that interest and inspire me, and I also think about what I'm not seeing. So for me, world building is 100% about exploring something that I don't see explored often enough especially in RPGs, but often in fiction in general.
Okay, go. What are you not seeing?
What I was seeing was a lot of historically based, and I'm making quotation marks and you can't see them, fantasy. But it was all based in Western Europe and very loosely sometimes in the Middle East. And I said there's so...
Midgard, for example.
Correct. And I said there's so much more interesting history from the same time period with the same types of weapons and the same, sorts of magic that would work perfectly. Why are we not telling stories that take place? Why are we not telling stories that take place on the open steppe or in the tundra? Why are we not seeing stories told from all of these equally rich historical traditions, and what can be set there that would and what would be interesting and unique about that?
Hell yeah. For me, I was seeing a lot of grimdark, low magic settings where magic is rare and mysterious, where things were bad and player characters maybe didn't even have any magical abilities. They're just regular barbarians and rangers and fighters and rogues. And I was like, you know what? I want to do something high magic where every character has magical powers. Every character is a badass. And so that's what, when I was looking at seeing, not seeing, that's what I was looking at. And as someone who's toyed around with campaigns that have airships or more futuristic technology or basic firearms, I saw a lot of campaigns that had firearms and themes of steampunk. So I'm like, I do not want to do that. I want to stick to the basic technology given in the game, but not low magic, not punishing and brutal.
And this is another interesting point. So Matt and I have both talked about themes, high magic versus low magic, and for me, unexplored areas of history. But the other thing that there were two main inspirations. The other thing that I wanted to look at was I wrote this campaign for Pathfinder, and there were some very cool rules in Pathfinder for mounted combat. And you almost never got to use them in a Pathfinder campaign or any D&D campaign because it's a lot of dungeon crawling, even the open world ones. And I was thinking, so much of history or so much of human experience involves life from horseback. So what would it be like if you had a campaign that was explicitly organized around the idea that your players are always or almost always going to be mounted? And if you want to...
I had a professor who once said, can you imagine the Eurasia without the horse? You could try, but it would be very strange. He had a weird accent.
That's exactly right. And so if your idea is, and this is the inspiration for a lot of sea-based campaigns, which are common enough now to not be uniquely interesting, though I have run more than one ship-based campaign, and I have yet to run into the perfect one. So there is still space, I think, in the TTRPG market for somebody to write the perfect Age of Sail pirate campaign, and maybe you'll be the person to do that. But that's also a place to think about. If there's a section of the rules where there's a type of play that you don't think is especially well explored in the traditional settings, maybe it's ships, maybe it's horses, maybe it's airships, like Matt says, maybe it's purely underground. There's room there for you to expand world building that way.
So we start with one, what are you seeing and not seeing? So you want to create something that's your players can't experience anywhere else. Part 2 of where to begin, we said, was inspiration. And again, this is very exciting because Robert and I do not know what the campaign settings each other has been looking for. So we're going to try and figure it out as we list our inspiration. So what other fiction or genres or something has inspired what you're working on?
So let me say this. So there's two things right now that I'm inspired by. I have been, I'm going to say, obsessed over the past, I'm going to say 5 years by, there's this outsider view of Western Europe from Japan specifically that I think is absolutely fascinating. And you will see this in games like Dark Souls, in manga like Berserk, in anime like Full Metal Alchemist.
The inspirations for the campaign I'm working on. I love episodic Planet of the Week style original Star Trek shows where you go to a place, there's a problem or a moral dilemma that you have to confront. So Kung Fu, Farscape, I love those shows. I also love this sort of grappling with like what sort of code of honor do we as a group have and who is following it and who is not, from The Sopranos. And then I was also just inspired a little bit by my least favorite, I challenge myself, my least favorite class in Dungeons and Dragons is the Paladin. And I've never played a Paladin. I'm not going to say I've always had it secretly out for my characters who play Paladins, but I've never really liked them. So
it's probably true.
I decided I want to make a game with Paladins that I would like. So those were my inspirations. What about yours?
So my inspirations were, I love Eberron. We're always talking about this, but what's cool about Eberron is the idea that what would the world look like? What would it really look like if there was so much magic? Like if wizards can just create water, or clerics can create food and water, what does that look like? If you can use magic to replicate modern day technology, how does that affect the economy and the functioning of the world? And I think this is a grave and egregious oversight in all fantasy, but especially in Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs. You have all this, in some cases, magic everywhere, but everybody still lives in the dirt like a medieval peasant. And so, so I wanted to explore that in a different way. I wanted to do a little bit of what Eberron does, but specifically tweak the rules a little bit so that alchemy specifically and alchemical creations are more powerful, that potions and alchemical reactions are easier to produce by normal people. I have a class that's a little bit like the Majorite from Eberron, an alchemist that can create things and do certain reactions to replicate certain types of elements. And how does that change the world? So it's sort of, you could call it sort of alchemy punk. But I wanted to imagine a world where that was the case, how it would change the power dynamics, how certain classes would become more powerful and less powerful. And then I also wanted to explore, because I'm a filthy socialist, ideas of capital and what would happen if, all of the certain, all of the alchemical creations were controlled by one giant East India Company type entity, and how the players would relate to that.
Hell yeah. So I can see our two worlds that we're just telling each other about now are going to line up in some interesting ways and diverge in some interesting ways. So we talked about where to begin. Talking about your inspiration, what you're not seeing, and we're talking about theme. You said your theme is talking about sort of this giant corporation and understanding the role of chemical or alchemy.
Right. So theme for me was, I think that RPGs tend to take place generally in a very feudal, hierarchical society. You are even in the ones that depart from Forgotten Realms tend to have kings and emperors and princes and nobles, and my campaign will still have those things, but I wanted to run something where perhaps the most powerful people were in fact clerks and bureaucrats and members of the board of directors, in sort of a pre-modern setting. I studied history in sort of the late or sort of the early modern period, and so there's a lot of South Sea Bubble, East India Company type stuff, and I wanted to take a look at what it would be like if those were the people in power rather than kings or nobles or something like that. It's not explicitly, evil corporations. You can explore that very well in Shadowrun or any number of future or close modern games, but I wanted to explore a different type of power dynamic.
Cool. And for my theme, I'm stealing this, and this is the great thing about homebrews, you can just steal things. I really love the indie RPG Dogs in the Vineyard. I should put a caveat on that. I love parts of it. I hate lots of it. But I love that the idea is to quickly create a scenario where players have to make sort of interesting choices, sometimes moral, sometimes practical, about how to deal with a situation. There's lots of weird, super weird parts of the game, both mechanically and thematically. So I wanted to get away from some of those, but keep in that kind of like, I want the players to come in and make some moral choices. And that's my theme. Is players come in and have to make some moral choices.
So for another theme that I wanted to explore, I'm not sure if we're going to call this scheme, but I wanted to change the scope of the game. I explicitly made my last setting very epic in scope, and I wanted to vastly condense the area of play, both to make the players not feel less significant, that sounds bad, but to impress upon them the size of of what they're trying to deal with and what they're trying to change, but also to challenge myself to create a more robust campaign in a smaller play area. So I'm focusing on a single city.
Hell yeah. And that's a thing we haven't talked about, but yeah, a campaign can be a planet, it can be a universe, be a solar system. My last campaign setting is a entire solar system and a wing of a galaxy, right? Or it can also be one mega dungeon, one city. All right, I think we've talked about where to begin. The next section here that I've got, and Robert doesn't know about this, so I'm excited to see what he thinks, is what are the assumptions under the rule set you're using? We're basing this off of the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule set, but if you're using Fate, if you're using Savage Worlds, if you're using Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, listing out what are the assumptions from the rules is a good place to start, because this will let you know whether you need to tweak some shit or change anything from the rules. Maybe you don't have to for your campaign setting. So
this is a great thing to bring up. And Matt has mentioned gritty, low magic campaigns, and this is one of my pet peeves, because people keep trying to make these gritty, low magic campaign settings in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I think one of the first third-party 5th edition ones was one where there was no magic at all. It was just 5th edition with all the magic stripped down.
And I think that this is a huge mistake if you're running a Dungeons and Dragons game.
Medieval times sucked ass, guys.
Regardless of whether or not you want to run a campaign like that, you don't. It sucks and it's not fun. But also, it fundamentally does not work with Dungeons and Dragons. There are rule sets where you can run a low magic campaign. I think maybe Savage Worlds could work that way. I think that I'm actually having trouble coming up with a great example because it's just not good. But Dungeons and Dragons explicitly has magic baked into its very bones. You can't strip that out without making your players unhappy or frustrated or disappointed and sort of breaking the entire ecosystem of the game. So this is a very important thing to ask yourself is, what are the assumptions of your rule set?
And so my assumptions, I'm building off of some tips for world building from a really old article by Rich Burlew, who's the guy who writes this comic called Order of the Stick. And what he really understands, and the entire webcomic is about what if the assumptions of the 3rd edition of the Dungeons & Dragons rule set were physical and metaphysical law in the world, how would people react? So I think he's a pretty good source for doing this. And he's got a list of like 10 or 11 things. Some of them no longer apply to 5th edition, like arcane and divine magic are inherently separate. But I've tried to tweak his and give you a list of 8 quick assumptions for the 5th edition rule set. Robert, I want you to decide whether any or all or none of these apply to what you're thinking about for your campaign. So here are the 5th edition assumptions. 1, the gods are real. 2, anyone with a high enough intelligence, wisdom, or charisma can use magic and rituals. 3, alignments are a real thing and change the effects of magic and creatures can have on you. They can be sensed and things like that. 4, humans can reach other dimensions and realities. 5, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways to get magic powers. 6, there are 3 wilderness-oriented classes, therefore the wilderness is a big part of the world. 7, magic items are fairly rare. 8, magic itself is consequence-free for the most part. And then, I'm sorry I lied, 9, humans dominate the world.
Those are really interesting. And I think that using those as a baseline assumption, especially if it's your first time world building, is good. Because what's smart about those is that it requires the least amount of effort to adapt the rule set to your world.
Right. If you fuck with any of these, you'll probably have to change rules or classes or things like that.
And I mention that because in my admittedly nascent world that I'm
right. We're just building these along with you.
That I'm working on. Many of these are not true.
Okay, which ones are you deciding?
Well,
I
know don't have to give us sound annoying, but bear with me. The gods are not real. There are, however, other very tangible divine sources of magic from which to draw power from. Alignment, it matters, but not in the sense that Rich Burlew is talking about. In my world, magic items will be abundant, much like Eberron, though they will be generally in the form of something consumable. A potion, an injection, a poultice, something that can be produced by alchemy. But in general, those are good rules. And like we talked about, those are good rules because if you fiddle with them, you're going to have to change a lot of things. I also I don't know that the nature one applies quite as strongly in 5th edition. The Druid and the Ranger, and what's the third one? Druid, Ranger, Barbarian. I think can be relatively within the rules adapted to not need to be in the wilderness.
Sure.
Because
default as written, they are people who have learned their professions out in the wilderness.
Though in 3.5 they had things like wilderness survival and track, and which were very explicitly be outside to use, but I don't think that's quite as right.
Maybe I should have tweaked that one from 3.5 to 5.
No, but it's still a good rule. These are good rules. I need to take a look at that article. Rich Burlew has his finger on the pulse of what makes D&D D&D, and it's a great guideline for when you start thinking about your world.
I wish he would come back to being a Dungeons & Dragons thought leader instead of whatever it is he does with all his time.
I'm not sure what he's doing.
All right. Yeah. So in my world setting, I'm going to fuck with some of these for sure. Number 1, gods are real. I'm going to say the gods are dead. Oh, no.
Dead gods.
I'm going to say that people killed them. Number 2, anyone can use magic and rituals. Keeping that. But then I'm going to skip down to number 8. Magic is consequence free? No. High level magic, and even low level magic can cost you hit points. It's abundant, it's powerful, and it's dangerous. Maybe that magic is what killed the gods. Maybe it's what's made the world such a shitty place. And then I'm going to fuck with humans dominate the world a little bit and just simple things out and say, right now there's only humans. Maybe powerful human mages just genocided the other races. And then I'm also going to fuck with there are different ways to get magic powers a little bit, and that there are 3 wilderness-oriented classes. I think I'm only going to have 1 class.
You've mentioned this to me already. I think it's nonsense, but I respect your initiative, Matt, and I'm excited to see what you.
Some worlds that you build will be nonsense and will be huge failures.
Yeah. Oh, so that's actually such a great point. Laughing. Actually, I do want to talk about this. Look, not all of your world building is going to succeed. Sometimes your players are going to come in and screw it up, and sometimes it's going to fizzle. Sometimes it's going to just not work the way that you had in mind, and. What's great is that you can salvage this. You can steal wholeheartedly from your failed creations and graft it onto something else that will work. I tried to run a Kingmaker campaign for my local group where I had tweaked a bunch of the names and themes so that I could explore some of the stuff that would eventually make it into Thunder on the Steppe. And my players were just not invested in that at all and totally broke what I was trying to work on. And I just had to scrap it entirely.
Yeah, that's the risk and reward of building your own world. All right, so we've shared with you what the assumptions you have to decide to face are, how to get started. I think what you need next is sort of like before you get to, like we talked about in our previous episode, a campaign Bible, which should be your first goal to produce for your players. You have to give them, just an elevator pitch, right?
We're assuming you have some goodwill, but unless you have essentially infinite goodwill, your players are going to want to know why we're playing this instead of a pre-written module. That doesn't have to be hard. Matt and I have already produced a bunch of things that could be used as an elevator pitch to our players when we start presenting these new worlds. But you need to have something. You need to say, why are we playing this instead of something that already exists and has a whole bunch of literature around it. And doesn't have to be deep or complicated, but start thinking about how you're going to sell it. Part of what you do as a DM is you're a salesman. Everybody is a salesman these days. We're all selling ourselves all the time. But you as a DM are selling yourself and your game much of the time.
Should we try and sell each other our campaign settings? I'm going to say Robert hasn't heard mine yet, and I'm worried if I can't sell it to Robert.
Matt hasn't heard mine yet, and he also ambushed me and it's not anywhere near close to being sellable. But this is a good challenge, so let's see if we can sell each other on this.
You to be in the same space we're at as you're starting.
So yeah, we'll see how this goes. But I think it's a good exercise, and you can watch us fail in real time. So go ahead, Matt.
All right, here I'm gonna roll some bones to see who goes first. Rolling some sheep knuckle bones. All right, yes, looks like it's me.
All right.
Okay, so here's my pitch. You know how you've played the same, or at least for my players, this is true. The same fantasy RPG where there's dwarves and elves and hobbits and rangers and druids and clerics and mages and all these different things. And sometimes your character is a weakling wizard, and sometimes your character is a strong barbarian, and you struggle, and finally you get to feel like a badass. What if, from the beginning, you're all a group of badasses? All of you are good warriors. All of you have some skills. All of you can cast some magic spells at the beginning, because you're basically all fantasy atheist paladins trying to help people survive. You go around the world helping people in isolated communities solve their problems, because you know what? Those greedy fucking wizards and clerics long ago cast in their 9th level spells with no regard. They broke the barrier between our world and the other one, and now our world is really shitty. It's full of monsters, and back in the main continent, people are still getting eaten and sacrificing people to monsters, and everything's corrupt because they have unlimited power, but they never think of the cost. We know that magic comes with a cost, and we patrol it tightly, and that's your job. You're a member of the Mage Watch. You gotta go around to our communities, hunt their monsters, solve their problems. Sometimes they just need help building a new fishing boat, or solving a dispute over a herd of goats. But other times, there's a fucking vampire preying on their community, or a witch casting spells, and it's your job to solve it. And guess what? You're all really powerful and good at stopping these problems.
I like it. I'm sold.
Drawing on Dogs in the Vineyard, The Witcher,
The
Sopranos,
sure.
Kung Fu.
A little bit of Conan, a little bit of Barsoom, a little bit of, pulp, action, adventure, mercenary stuff. I do love the mercenary pitch. At this stage in my role-playing career, I really like to lean into the gritty mercenary thing. Regardless of what the world's like, I like that, the idea that you're trying to make a living in a dangerous world. So yeah, that works for me. All right.
Oh yeah.
Let me see if I can come up with a pitch, because I haven't thought about this very much at all. All right. There's a city at the heart of the world. It sits on the intersection of every trade route, every source of wealth that exists. Quicksilver and gold run through the veins of the city, and you have come at a critical moment, at the precipice of history, to make a difference. Maybe you're there to get rich. Maybe you're there to change the course of things. Maybe you're there to challenge the consortium for control of the levers of wealth and power. And everybody who has any interest in the way that the world is going to be shaped from here on out is here in this city at this moment. And you have a chance to put your finger on the pulse and to change the way that things are going to be. And you are trying to gain power and become wealthy and affect the future of the world. That is where you are at this point in time, and this is extremely vague, but that's what I've got so far.
Hell yeah, I love the city of the world's desire.
That's right, city of the world's desire. It's Istanbul. It's London. It's probably Istanbul.
Those are the only two cities.
The only two cities that we're familiar with. It's Istanbul. It's London. It's
New York,
Tokyo.
baby.
It's New York, baby. It's Boston. It's all of these at once, and everyone who is everyone, every important person, every powerful person, every organization has, its fingers in the goings on. Politicians are corrupt. There's so much money and power, and you have a chance to both be affected by it and affect it. It's, I think, a more political, a more noir, a more steampunk campaign. And it's both small in scope but large in scope, and I think that a certain type of player will enjoy that, I hope.
Hell yeah, I'm sold. I would enjoy it.
All right.
You've passed the first test.
So start thinking about your elevator pitch. It can be as granular and as specific in terms of theme, or it can just be an idea. Mine was really just sort of a setting. Matt's is more a style of play. But, all you need to do is get your players invested, get them something to sink their teeth into. But this is supposed to be a 101, Matt, and we have been going for quite some time. Is there anything you want to cover before we wrap up?
I'm gonna try and give. I forgot I actually wrote out a pitch.
Oh my!
It was going off the top of my head. I'm gonna read my pitch again and maybe insert it.
That's fine. Read me your written pitch, and we can pretend like that last part didn't happen.
Okay. Quoting a little Isaiah here. Your slain men are not slain with the sword, nor dead in battle. All your rulers have fled together. All who are living will soon be dead. For thus has the seer said to me, go set a watchman. Let him declare what he sees. Here's my elevator pitch. What happens to a fantasy world when the evil wizards succeed? What happens when the world is already covered in a second darkness? It's not exactly as you expected. The veil between our world and the horrors of another plane is breached. When the gods are slain and the beautiful ivory cities fall, guess what? It's not the end. Not by a long shot. When the corrupt wizards and clerics of the old world live in decadence, the few faithful, the levelers, have fled together to promote a new society based on equality and shunning the use of magic without cost. You, following the Great Seer, are a member of Mage Watch. You must travel from town to town and settlement to settlement, solving their problems and slaying the monsters that plague the faithful levelers. Oh, yeah, by the way, you're a badass. You got a cool sword. You got some cool armor. You can use skills. You've got some magic powers. You can solve the problems that the regular people cannot. You are their shield. You are their sword. You are a member of Mage Watch.
That's pretty good.
So protect communists in a dark future.
I like it. Revolutionaries.
The communists need you. You're their commissar.
I like that a lot.
Magical commissar.
It's I'm absolutely sold.
I was trying to make this, and I realized everyone's paladins, but I'm like, I hate paladins, and so I'm like, they basically, you have to be a fighter caster.
I like it. I'm interested, though. No, I like it. I think you'll.
No, give me some criticism.
I think you're going to run into problems. I have run into problems every single time I've tried to restrict any player class at all whatsoever. Players are always going to cause pushback on that, but I like it, and I would find a way to work within it.
My pitch to them is that the Watcher class, or I might call it Arbiter or something like that, is basically, it's better at everything than every other class. They have a barbarian's hit dice, they have fighters second wind, they have the rogue's expertise, they have basic magical powers. I also went heavily into alchemy. The players are better than, if you come across a common fighter or a common wizard, you're going to kick his ass unless he has some tricks up his sleeve.
I do think it's funny, and this is at the end, so we can cut it out if it's not relevant. But I do think it's kind of funny that we both leaned into Marxism for our settings.
Marxism and alchemy.
Marxist alchemists. I explicitly wanted to sort of simulate Paris on the eve of the commune type of feel for my city.
Like a Les Mis?
A little bit. No,
the commune was later.
The commune was later, but sort of that idea. Paris in the midst or on the cusp of revolution, people's consciousness in conflict with both capital and with, the established order of hierarchy and the ways in which that would create unique and interesting decisions for the players to make. which is why I wanted both the scope to be small, but also large. And the decisions that they make there and how it affects the city will emanate.
Right, because it's the center of the world.
Because it's the center of the world, exactly. Sorry, the city I didn't mention earlier. We said London, we said Istanbul, but also Paris.
We're coming at the problem from like, you're coming at it from like before, defining what a new world could be, communism. My setting predisposes that there was the seer, the diviner, this archmage, Karl Marx stand-in who said, here's another way to live.
Right.
And sort of obscures all the background work that went into it. And then players are in a society that's already adopted a more communalist, less hierarchical organization. The only problem is they now have no protection against the ravages of not exactly capital, but of this hierarchy of
magic,
of wizards that
right.
control. Because I've always wondered, like, if you have a wizard who can cast 9th level spells, like, why aren't they taking over, right? And that's the thing, is like, wizards have taken over. They've set up a decadent hierarchy. They've let monsters into the world. They're constantly creating these terrible experiments, but they don't care because their towers and palaces are all warded. Common folk are in trouble. And the people, the communists, the levelers, whatever I'm going to call them, they don't have any protection. So that's why they've created the Mage Watch, who use very small magic powers, who don't attract attention, but who hunt their monsters. And I always thought it would be fun to like really mix it up with like, you come to a village. The problem here is a love tribe. There are no monsters this time, right? You come to the next village. There's a werewolf hunting people. You got to go find
I do love the Dogs in the Vineyard Witcher Monster of the Week type play. I think that's a great thing.
I've never played The Witcher, but I realized it and Dogs in the Vineyard are very similar.
You're describing it exactly right. You come to a town and they're like, there's a monster stealing my sheep, or it's something dumb, dumb. Like, oh no, I'm locked in my house. Could you please help me can you please help me, unlock the door? I lost the key.
I looked at so obviously for anything as popular in fantasy as The Witcher, some people have made like 5th edition fan conversions. I was like, oh, this might be a fun place to start. Again, I've never played the games. I've read like a couple of the incredibly sexist short stories. Yay, Poland. But yeah, I was like looking at the 5th edition conversions. And it's all like, well, here's how the class is laid out, and here's how here's some stats for some of the unique monsters. I'm like, you don't really get it, do you? The Witcher is it's basically all on the DM's end. How do you set up a problem for a village?
Right.
And that's what Dogs in the Vineyard sort of does okay, is like, how do you create a town where there's a problem to solve? Right.
And I think that's the interesting thing about The Witcher is the small scale of solving people's problems. Even when it becomes very difficult, it's still, there's a monster plaguing our village, except it's a very big monster. And I think that's interesting. You're going around and you're solving people's problems, which is great. I love that. That's what makes The Witcher, to me, so much fun, is you're a guy who goes around and you try to make things a little bit better for the dirt-dwelling mud farmers of, shitty fantasy Poland.
Debout les damnés de la terre, debout les forçats de la faim, la raison commence au cratère, c'est l'éruption de la faim. Du passé, faisons table rase, sous l'esclave, debout, debout. Le monde va changer de base, nous ne sommes rien, soyons tout. C'est la lutte finale, nous pour nous et demain. L'internationale sera le genre humain.